Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto, I'm a photographer. Welcome to another video. This time we're going to take a look at this brand new Sirui Aurora 35mm F1.4 prime lens for full frame cameras. The reason I'm not holding the lens in my hand while I'm talking is that I'm using the lens to film the talking head parts of this video. So I can't hold the lens in my hand while it's mounted on my Lumix S5 Mark II X camera. But before we talk more about the lens, here's the compulsory disclaimer. Sirui very kindly sent this lens to me so I can take it out for a spin and share my impressions with you guys. But other than that, this video is not sponsored, no money changed hands, and no one told me what to do with the lens, and no one except me has seen this video before you guys. The lens that I received is for the L mount, and I shot all my pictures and also this video on my Lumix S5 Mark II X camera. But this lens is also available for the Sony E mount, the Nikon Z mount and the Fuji X mount. On the Fuji, this lens would of course perform more like a 52.5mm lens because the Fuji X cameras use a crop sensor. This is a fast aperture prime lens, but the price is very affordable, $549 US. Unfortunately, I don't know how the price is in other regions. However, the price is very budget friendly, but of course we want to find out if this lens is any good, because the affordable price alone is not enough if the optical performance lags behind. This video is not going to be a full-blown technical review. This is more like a user experience review based on some real-world photography. And I'm now going to share some things that I like about this lens and then some things I don't like. Let's get started. The first like is the size and the balance on the camera body. Of course, a fast aperture full frame prime like this is never going to be super compact, but I still think this lens is fairly compact for what it is. It also balances very nicely on the Lumix S5 Mark II X camera body. This lens weighs in at about 494 grams and the filter thread is 62mm. The next like is the build quality, all metal construction and weather sealed too, which is very nice, especially when you consider the affordable price. The next like is the feature set. This lens is packed with features. There's a very nice aperturing with or without clicks, switch for manual focus, autofocus, programmable button, and then there is one more switch to prevent the aperturing accidentally going to the A position. So a lot of features for this kind of price. The next like is the reliable autofocus performance. At least on my Lumix S5 Mark II X, the lens performed really nice. The autofocus was fast and very reliable. Absolutely nothing to complain about the autofocus. The minimum focusing distance is 0.35 meters, which is pretty normal for a lens like this. Nothing special. However, this lens is still capable of some nice close-ups, and of course you can always crop in a little bit tighter if necessary. The next like is the bokeh, which to my eyes looks pretty good. It's not the best bokeh I have ever seen, but it's still pretty decent, and we have to remember all the time that this lens is very affordable for such a wide aperture prime lens. The next like is the vignetting or the lack of it. I can't see any distracting vignetting in my pictures. There might be some software correction happening in the background, but what I see in my pictures looks really nice and the vignetting is never distracting or a problem. And the next like is the lack of distortions, absolutely zero distortions. Also, in this case, there might be some software correction happening in the background, but in the final pictures I can see absolutely zero distortion, which is always really nice. And the next like is the lack of chromatic aberrations, which is always nice, especially the longitudinal chromatic aberrations can be really a pain to remove in post. and I can see very little chromatic aberrations in the pictures I shot on this lens. Very, very nice. Then we have some dislikes, and the first is the sharpness. And this is a little bit tricky because the lens that I received is obviously not perfect. There must be a lens element ever so slightly misaligned or something, because the rendering across the frame is not even or symmetrical. Let's take a look at this picture, wide open, f1.4, in the middle, really good sharpness, nothing to complain. However, the right side of the picture is really blurry, and the left side of the picture is not nearly as blurry as the right side. So there is clearly something funny going on here. Here's another picture at f2. The main subject, the lady sitting on the stairs, is really super sharp, nothing to complain. But look how uneven the background blur is. The right side of the frame is really super blurry, and the left side of the picture is not nearly as blurry as the right side. But to make it even more bizarre, let's look at this picture shot at f4. The mid-frame again, really super sharp, nothing to complain. And the right side of the picture now looks pretty decent. Not perfect, but pretty good. However, when we move to the left side of the picture, we can see that it's not nearly as good as the right side of the picture. So when I'm stopping down, the sharpness kinda shifts from left to right, which is really weird. And clearly this lens is not a good copy. Finally, at f11 I can see a pretty even sharpness across the frame. I fully understand that sharpness is not the most important thing in a photograph, and I'm willing to accept a certain amount of softness and blur around the corners and edges of the frame at wide apertures, as long as it's symmetrical across the frame. And as long as the lens sharpens up by about f4 or f5.6 when I stop down. But if the rendering is asymmetrical, like in this case, I simply can't take it. It's a no-go for me. However, I still managed to get some nice pictures on this lens, and especially these portraits shot at wide open aperture. They look really nice, and the asymmetrical rendering is not distracting in these pictures at all. Then we have one more dislike. This lens does not like backlight. If you shoot into the sun or into any bright light source, you can very easily get huge flare, huge reflections, and loss of contrast. It doesn't look too bad in every backlit picture, but in some pictures it looks really bad and overwhelming, and it will ruin your shots. This is a bit of a letdown. I was expecting a little bit better backlight performance. Now, how to conclude this user experience review. This lens has a lot going for it, and I suspect that if you get a decent copy of this lens, the sharpness is not going to be an issue. But will you get a good copy? That's a good question, because Sirui clearly have some quality control issues if they send out lenses like the one I received. But of course you make your own conclusions based on your needs, your photography, and I also recommend for you to watch at least a review or two here on YouTube and see what other people say about this lens. I hope you enjoyed this user experience review. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this a lot, if this was useful, please do consider buying me a cup of coffee. There's a link down below for that if you don't live in Finland. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon in the next one.